And if you want to get really weird, I did this a little bit last year with a guy during bullpens. I would literally have him change his mechanics every single time he made a pitch on the mound. So let's just say it was all fastballs. It was a 10-pitch bullpen. All fastballs, trying to throw it in the strike zone right down the middle. I'd have him do one throw from the far first base side of the rubber with his arm at a low 3/4 slot. The next one, I'd have him go on the far third base side from over the top. The next one would be like a drop step throw, like a plyo drill that you would do. We would just change it up. Literally every throw would be different. And we'd see how many times he could throw it for a strike from those different positions.
All right, so today we're going to talk about command. And command has been a pretty tricky one for me my whole career. I've always been a guy who, early in my career I threw really hard, but didn't throw too many strikes. I didn't walk the house, but I was an average strike thrower. And when I was 2020, 2021, I had really great stuff. I had a great sweeper. I had good movement on my sinker, everything. But my downfall was that sometimes I just didn't throw enough strikes. And so I have gone down a big rabbit hole of, okay, how do I increase command? And some things have worked, some things haven't. But we want to share with you some stuff that have worked for us and what I've actually found from just researching how to improve command. So I'll start off with my first point, which is, so this is a big topic, like mindset, like, your mental state. And there's a couple things that I want to hit on really quick, which is, the first one is arousal. So you kind of need to know yourself on this one. And everyone has their optimal state of arousal. And what do I mean by arousal? It's like how chill do you want to be on the mound, or how excited do you want to be on the mound? Are you a guy who likes to be super chill and like you play the best when you're super calm, you're peaceful, and you go out there and compete? Or do you need to get like hyped up, like caffeine, and get all like crazy on the mound to play your best? So first thing is like just knowing yourself on that one and trying to get yourself to a level that suits you. I know I was a guy who really had to calm myself down because I was I naturally get a lot of nerves and anxiety and stuff like that. So I had to calm myself down with a couple things like breathing and stuff like that. But what side were you on, Jared?
Real quick, everyone. I wanted to let you know that my new course, Pitch Design U, is officially available for purchase. I have 3 core modules inside the course. The first one covering the fundamentals of pitch movement, how it is created. Number 2, I break down how to throw every single pitch type with major league examples, as well as Edgertronic video. And then the last module, I dive into the analytics and the performance of every single pitch and how to optimize the usage and your arsenal overall. Check it out in the show notes below. All right, back to the show. I was more on the chill side, but it was more of like, I don't know, I kind of had an angry look to me. It wasn't intentional, but like I just looked like someone that was pissed off when I was pitching or I was in the dugout and in between innings. And I kind of went up and down with like experimenting with different strategies to see which one would work the best. Like I thought getting super hyped up and like trying to be fiery was going to work better for me. I thought like that was what I needed to be. And it just wasn't authentic. It just wasn't who I was. And it never seemed to work. So I was more of the Kyle Hendricks style versus the Max Scherzer style. I just pitched at my best when I was more calm, but I had a very serious look on my face, but I was very focused and just relaxed. And regardless if I gave up a hit or I got a big strikeout, I pretty much acted the same. And that was what I found to be the best for me.
Yeah. This is a pretty tough one because you could be in the middle. You can't be on either spectrum. I've definitely experimented with both. I've, experimented with a ton of caffeine and getting myself excited with loud music and stuff like that. And what I found was that's good for velo. I mean, on velo days, that's exactly what I would do if I wanted to PR on that day. But it wasn't the best when you had to go out and compete for 5, 6, 7 innings as a starter. And so, but on the flip side, I did try all right, I'm going to try super calm today. Like like close to being sleepy almost. And I went out there and I was like sitting 86. And so I was like, all right, you got to find a happy medium there. But for me, it was more on the calm, peaceful side. And something that really worked for me was I read a thing about flow states when I was playing, and it really resonated with me. It's flow state is pretty much when I think everyone would have like felt this once in their career, multiple times. Where it's like you're just out there and everything seems to just flow and everything seems to just go well, and you're kind of like you're focused, but you're not on either side of the spectrum. You're just kind of like you're just trying less and performing better. And I would try to get into that state every time I would compete. Obviously, I didn't, but I did have this routine that I felt like it actually really helped get me into, not a full flow state, but like a little bit similar feeling of a flow state. And so I would have a dedicated playlist, and my playlist would be sometimes it would be like calm classical music, or I also love this thing called lo-fi. And so it's like super calm music, and that kind of would like get me in the flow a little bit. And then I would always have a throwing program where I would be like just super free and like pretty much just like not caring where the ball would go. And I was like, I was just super athletic and I was just super free, and I would do that. And that was kind of my flow state routine. I don't know if it actually helped or not, but it made me feel a little bit more calm and peaceful, and get into the flow state a little bit more. So that's kind of something what I did. Did you do anything with flow states?
Yeah, I actually did experiment a little bit with different playlists of music depending on like what I felt like I needed that day. It's funny you mentioned that. I was pretty similar with that. And what I found worked best for me before pitching was listening to instrumental music. So not listening to anything with lyrics, but more, I guess you would just call it focus type music. So like if you know who Explosions in the Sky is, they're a group that does a lot of songs in the show and movie Friday Night Lights. Like I love that type of music. It just gets me super focused and locked in. So I would listen to that type of music. I would listen to, I'm blanking on what they're called. I think they're called Dead Mouth or Dead. It's spelled like dead and like M5 or MA5. You know who I'm talking about? So that's like what I would listen to, that type of music where it's no lyrics really, maybe very minimal lyrics, but there's a very good beat to it and something that like really draws in your focus. And like I just felt like after I listened to that during my stretching and my warm-up routine, like I just felt like I was completely just in the zone, just in my own little world as I was throwing. And that's what worked the best for me, was just listening to that type of music rather than something, super hardcore rap or rock or whatever it might be. It was more of just something that really enhanced that focus and allowed me just to focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I also heard this thing about like if you listen to one song on repeat, that's like the best for focus. I know that like Kobe Bryant used to listen to one song when he was like warming up. He would listen to some, I don't know exactly what the song was, but he would just listen to one song on repeat in the locker room, and everyone would be like, "Damn, this guy's a psycho." But that just helped him get in the zone. And so, yeah, music can be a really big factor into, getting into the flow state, which in turn will help your command.
I have a question for you in regards to that, because obviously when you're starting, it's easier to kind of have that routine. Like we've talked about this on numerous episodes with really anything, whether it's a throwing routine, plyos, all that. It's easy as a starter because you know exactly when you're going to throw. But like when you were in the bullpen this year and, maybe to speak at large as a reliever, what have you found to be helpful tools for guys to be in that flow state? So maybe it's pregame, they're listening to this type of music and they have their routine, but then they don't pitch till the 8th inning. So they're sitting on the bench for 2 hours. Like, how do you get back into that flow state? Because I'm assuming you're not trying to stay locked in like that for 2 hours, because that's going to be super mentally taxing and draining. But how do you turn that switch on and get into that flow state when you start warming up in, let's just say, the 8th inning?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, the flow state routine and stuff is mainly for starters. I feel like relievers, especially for me, and what I saw from all of my teammates was that going out and relieving pretty much just relied on adrenaline and it wasn't too much like flow state. It was just kind of like you were chilling, and then your name gets called, and you're like, oh shit, all right, let's go, let's go throw. So it was more adrenaline, but the best guys that I saw would definitely, they would listen to music before they would go out. They would always have their headphones in the locker room, in their locker, and yeah, they'll do it beforehand. But I always found it interesting how, like, the best relievers that I saw, how they can stay locked in throughout the game, because it's really tough. Like, 2 hours go past and you don't even know if you're going to throw, and staying locked in that whole time, I think, the best ones do it, but I had a really hard time doing it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, right? Because like, I think even if you talk to the best relievers in baseball, like, I don't think they're fully laser focused from inning 1 to 9 or whatever it might be, but they have a routine. They have their go-tos in between the 3rd inning, the 4th inning, whatever it might be. They know what they need to do to prepare themselves, and they're able to get sort of mentally locked in quickly, but it is something that's happening earlier on. It's not just, they're screwing around the first 4 innings and then they turn it on. They have some sort of routine, at least from what I've seen. So I think like that would be the moral of the story for relievers is, yeah, your routine might be inconsistent because you don't know exactly when you're going to pitch, but you can still have a routine. You can still have a pregame routine of what you're doing, like you said, in the locker room before the game starts. And then you can have an in-game routine with stretching, warming up, those types of things, and understanding, how soon do you need to start, quote unquote, mentally locking in before you go into the game. For some people, it might be sooner. Some people, it might be later. But I think the important part is to have a routine and just understand that it does need to be adaptable. So we're kind of going a little off topic, but I think it is important because all these things do factor into what we're talking about, which is command and throwing strikes. If I'm not mentally focused, if I'm not able to focus on the task at hand, I get distracted easily and all those things, that is 100% going to throw off your command. And before we dive deeper into, other strategies and things that we need to work on, like arousal, I want to ask you a question. And I have my thoughts on this, but I'm curious with yours. Do you think command is, it comes more natural to some people versus others? Like, do you think it's kind of like velocity, like to start with, like some guys just naturally are just huge strike throwers, regardless of what their training experience had been, just like some guys are naturally throwing harder and other guys have to work harder to that? Or like, what is your take on developing command, but also people just kind of being born with the ability to throw strikes?
Yeah, I definitely think there are strike throwers out there. They're just guys who can just go out and compete and just throw strikes and not have to train for it. I know I went to Driveline and I was there for like 6 months, and I was there with a couple guys, and some of those guys went out and competed at Summer Ball after training 6 months in an indoor facility, not facing a single hitter, and they would go out and compete in Summer Ball, and they would compete just fine, like throw lots of strikes. And so I do definitely think that it does come naturally to some people, but it's definitely something that you can improve upon, like, a lot. I know a lot of it has to do with like your mental state. That was for me, because in bullpens I had great command, but when the hitter stepped in and when like the fans are there and everything's going on during games, I would my strike percentage would go way down. So and that's a mental thing. And so I do think there are some like naturals, strike throwers, but I also do think there are a lot of things that you can work on to improve your command.
For sure. Like when you were a kid, let's just say, I don't know what it is in Australia, if it's little league or what you play, but when you were a kid, say 7 through high school age, like, were you a pretty good strike thrower at that point? Or do you feel like this was always something you've had to work on a little bit more? And also, what was the emphasis from coaches at a young age? Was it like it is here, or at least it was when I was a kid, where the main focus was coaches just telling you to throw strikes? Or like, what was it like as a kid coming up playing baseball from a strike perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I wouldn't say that I never had great command, but I was very streaky for sure. So I'd go on like 3-4 really good starts, and then I'd like have 2 outings where I can't even get out of the first inning. So I was never really a super consistent strike thrower, but like when I got going, then I was good. So that's the kind of player that I was. And as for like what the emphasis was, yeah, for sure. In Australia, it was, you just throw strikes, like just throw strikes and you'll get outs, and then the coach is happy type thing. And I remember that like when I started my velocity training like journey, if you would call it that, I would just go off on my own, like the team is practicing playing catch and I'm out in the fence, like doing plyos and bringing my radar gun to practice and stuff like that. And so everyone thought I was weird, but I mean, I was the only one who was playing 5 years ago. So 5 years after. So yeah, no, the emphasis definitely command, command, command. But I think that's also shifting just a little bit. Do you think so?
Oh, 100%. And I think that it just makes me think that whatever you value, so like as a coach or just as a culture, a baseball culture, I feel like whatever is shown to be valued, that ultimately is going to get better. So the reason why velocity, I think, has gotten so much better is because there's been so much value in it. There's been so many people, coaches, players talking about the importance of it, and there's facts about how important it is. So now people train for it, they work towards it, versus 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, velocity was cool, it was important. Like when a guy threw 95 to 100, it's like, yeah, that's awesome. But it wasn't talked about at the youth levels, it wasn't talked about as much in high school. Strikes was the focus. So when that's the focus and that's what's getting measured and that's what matters ultimately, you're going to be better at that. You're going to focus more on that. So I think it just kind of comes down to what is the culture around you, what is, the environment around you preaching that needs to be improved upon. And not that every player, just because you say throw more strikes, is going to throw more strikes. But I think, in general, we're looking at the averages of every player or all the players. Walks are going to be lower when that is the main focus. When velocity is the main focus, velocity is going to be higher. So I think that's where it's really important that the message that's being preached as a culture and as coaches and what you're trying to get at your players is super important, because that sets the foundation, that sets the direction for what the player's intention is of what he's trying to improve. And, I think, the good coaches, at least, and the good players, they understand it's all important, right? Like just throwing hard and not throwing strikes, that doesn't work. Just throwing strikes and not having good stuff at all, that's not going to work either. And it's understanding where are you in your career and what is the most important thing for you to improve right now in order to get your next opportunity or to get to where you ultimately want to go. So I think like that's the important thing, is like as a player, you have to surround yourself around people that have your best interest and understand the bigger picture. And that's super hard, right? Like you can, you might think your coach knows what he's doing or you trust him because you have a great relationship with him. And maybe he just doesn't have a clue around what is the most important thing for you to get better, to get to Division I baseball, to get to professional baseball, if those are your goals. So it's really important though to almost vet the people that you're working with and like ask questions. Like don't be a player that just does everything, a coach says, or works with a coach because he's worked with X amount of professional players. That's great and all, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he understands fully what you need. So that's just a little tip for me, or something that I've been thinking a lot about, is players, you need to make sure that you're asking the questions and making sure that you're doing your homework on the people that are influencing your career.
Yeah, 100%. An interesting thing on that was that this year, actually, when I was in the pen, our coach would tell us, "Hey, relievers, all I want you guys to think about is velo. I don't care where the ball goes, just throw as hard as you possibly can. Like that's all I care about." And he'd make like bets with all the pitchers and everything. And our command improved because when we started doing that. When we stopped focusing on, we just need to throw strikes, execute. Instead, we're like, all right, we're just going to throw the crap out of it. Our command actually improved, which was funny. So, yeah, but I agree. Like you got to surround yourself with the people that, have the best interest for you. Should I dive into my second one, or do you want to go into yours?
Yeah, sure. I'll dive into one. I guess I got sidetracked with a little rants, if you want to call it that. So I'll dive into my first one real quick. And I've talked about this before, but differential balls to me are a really valuable tool. And before I dive into how to use them and all that, I'll just explain for those that don't know what they are. It's essentially any ball that is different from a regular baseball. So it could be different from a size, so how big or how small the ball is, or it could be a difference in weight, heavier or lighter. I typically like to use balls that are the same weight as a baseball, but are just bigger and smaller, especially when we're talking about younger players. I like to use the same weight as a baseball in those situations. But you can definitely use overload and underload as well as different size at the same time. So like you can use a bigger ball that is 6 ounces, or you can use a bigger ball that's 4 ounces. Now understand, when you're changing more than one variable, when you're changing the size and the weight, it becomes super difficult to command. So you want to understand where your player is at and not make it too difficult. The reason why this is important, because you might be thinking, well, shouldn't I be throwing a baseball all the time? If I want to have repeatable mechanics, if I want to be able to do the exact same thing every time, I should be throwing a baseball every time. And the truth is, it actually has the opposite effect. So by having differential balls, by using different implements, it actually challenges you more and increases that variability, which in return actually makes you more consistent when you are using the same implement like a baseball. So, just to use an example of this, you're really using a different ball, or you're in a different environment every single time you throw. No baseball is exactly the same weight. No baseball is the same size. And then when you factor in other variables like the pitching mound when you're on the road versus at home, when you're in the bullpen versus on the game mound, they're all slightly different, but you have to make adjustments from pitch to pitch, day to day. Every time you throw, it is a slight adjustment that you have to make, whether it's a different pitch type, different mound, different environment, all those things. So what the differential balls are doing is it is enhancing that, or challenging that bandwidth even more. So it's forcing you to make bigger adjustments pitch to pitch. So when you're in a game and the only adjustment you have to make is either the pitch type or just a slight difference in the ball, because every baseball, like I said, is slightly different to a degree. When you have challenged yourself in practice and made it really, really difficult, now when you're in a game and you have to make a minor change, it's a lot easier to make those changes and to be more consistent. So that is like one of the main reasons I like to use them. Second reason I like to use them is players typically don't like them. And this isn't like a general rule for me, but like I like to do things that players aren't super comfortable with, because I think it stretches them a little bit. It allows them to step out of their comfort zone. It shows that they can do hard things. It just comes back to another mental thing of overcoming obstacles and challenges, so that when you are in game situations, you've already proven yourself over and over again in various situations in your practice, in your training, in your life, that you are able to overcome hard things. So like that's another thing, another reason I like to do them. Now, when you're doing this in bullpens, you want to make it fairly easy at first, because it's going to be hard. Like even if I just, gave you a +5 ball, so a ball that's 5% bigger than a baseball, same weight, and I had you alternate between that and a baseball with just fastballs every other throw, I promise you, for most players, their strike percentage is going to be below 50% just by making that slight change. So we want to make sure that we are easing players into this, and that we're not making it so hard that they're not throwing any strikes, because we don't want to wreck the confidence. We don't want them to feel like they can't do anything and that they have no feel for the baseball. So you need to meet the baseball player, meet the pitcher where they are at. And generally, I like to see success rate be around 40 to 50%. It can get as low as 30, 35%. I definitely wouldn't go below that, but it seems around 40 to 50% is that sweet spot of being able to throw the ball in the strike zone with these different balls. I would start off with just doing a blocked format. So what that means is you are consistently using the same ball for X amount of throws before moving on to another ball for X amount of throws. Randomized approach would be exactly what it means. You are using a different type of ball or different pitch type every single throw. When you're first starting off, just do it in a blocked format. So let's just say we're doing fastballs. Have them throw 2 fastballs with a baseball, 2 fastballs with a +5, 2 fastballs with a baseball, 2 with a +5. That would be a simple example of how you could incorporate this. And if they're showing that they're throwing strikes at 60% plus, then it's probably time to increase the challenge a little bit more. Maybe you add in a -5 ball, or you start to incorporate different pitch types, because that's also going to allow them to be challenged a little bit more. Because if I'm throwing, let's just say I throw a fastball with a +5 and then I throw a curveball with a baseball, that's going to be a much different feel, because it's a different pitch type and it's a different ball right after that. So that's just a general way to use them. You can also use them in catch play. I generally do like to do it in catch play, actually, because when you first use a different ball on the mound, it's going to feel really weird, and your success rate is probably going to be really low when you're doing it on the mound for the first time. So I like to ease guys into it by having them do it in catch play. Challenge them just to throw different balls right to the chest to their partner, randomize the approach with +5s, -5s, get comfortable there, because it's a little bit safer in catch play. If I make a bad throw in catch play, most players don't think it's as big of a deal as making a bad throw in a bullpen when the coach is watching, other people are watching. It's just lower stakes in catch plays. I think it's an easy way to build confidence and get them used to those balls before transitioning to the mound. So, Josh, I know that we did this a little bit, or one bullpen when you threw a bullpen with me this winter, and you actually crushed it. I forget what your success rate is, but I was like, man, this guy, I don't think he's ever done this before, and he's throwing all of these for strikes right now. So, like, what was your experience like using them, and what did you feel?
I liked it. I definitely liked it. I think I did have a quick question, which was, so I did it for one session. Do you think one session of using those balls would show you some results straight away, or do you need to use it for like weeks and weeks?
Yeah, I would use this for an extended period of time. Like, I don't think there's an exact amount of time to use it, but one session probably wouldn't be enough. Like, if a guy has a serious command issue and like he needs to decrease his walks, like this should be a part of every single bullpen, even if it's just for like the first half. Let's say you're throwing 25 pitches, make your first 10 to 15 with this differential approach before moving on to maybe just regular execution or stuff or whatever it might be. I would incorporate it in every bullpen, as well as incorporating it in catch play at least 2 to 3 days a week. I think the more the better, especially if you're trying to drop a walk rate by a significant amount.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, which is like everyone thinks that if you do like a couple sessions with the differential balls, then your command's just going to improve straight away. But that's kind of the answer that I was looking for, is that you still need to be consistent with it. You can't really just do it once and then not do it again. I think that's kind of what I did, which was like, all right, yeah, it's cool. Like I'll do it a couple times, and then I just never really did it again. And I think it's because like training for command isn't really sexy. Like, I'm doing a command block. Like that's not really that sexy to say. Like everyone's thinking about, I'm doing a velo, or it's a live BP block, or something like that. But that's kind of one of my regrets, is that I definitely should have just taken like one off season and just fully focused on command, and then incorporated those weighted balls and differential balls, because it actually really could have helped my career if I had thrown a lot more strikes. But yeah, when I did it with you, I really liked them. I think it was something different and like a different stimulus to the body and the brain. And so, yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, for sure. And something to note too, like I'm talking about this in the sense of guys that struggle throwing strikes, but I actually think that there's value in everybody using them, because truth be told, everybody could improve their command in some way. Like, yeah, maybe you throw strikes a lot, but are you actually throwing the ball where you want it to go? And not that everyone needs to get to that level. Like, there might be more important things like improving your velocity, improving your stuff if you are throwing strikes. But like guys that are at the highest level that are throwing strikes, they have good stuff, but they're still getting hit around or not getting the results. Sometimes it's just where they're throwing it in the zone. So like when I was with the Twins, we would have guys even that were known for being strike throwers. They were still using this in their programming too. Like, just for an example, let's say, their fastball played the best at the top of the zone, but they weren't throwing at the top of the zone. They kept missing at the bottom of the zone or inside or outside, and they just could not consistently get it there. Command balls was a tool that we would use to help them get consistent with a specific location. So don't think that this is only for guys that struggle with throwing strikes. Like if you're at a stage in your career where you need to be precise with where you're throwing it, this is definitely going to be a really good step to challenge that and to increase your overall command and not just your control.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I'm going to dive into my second point, which is live hitters. And so I'm sure there are a ton of people out there who throw a lot of strikes in bullpens, but then when a live hitter steps in, your command deteriorates a little bit. And this was a problem that I had in bullpens. I had no issues throwing strikes. I would dot up everything. Everything was smooth. But then a live hitter steps in, and then maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was, well, I actually know what it was. It was just my experience with the yips, and like I would get a little bit tentative with a hitter in there, especially righties. I would be like, there was still a little bit of like tentativeness where it's like, oh, I don't want to miss inside. And so I would over adjust. So this was like all subconscious. So it was a little bit tough. But yeah, this is a mental thing. So if you're having troubles throwing strikes with live hitters, but you can throw strikes in a bullpen, then the simplest way to get better at this is to throw bullpens with live hitters in there. And I know that for some of you, it might be scary, or you just don't really want to do it because, if you ask someone to stand in and you don't want to hit them and stuff like that. But honestly, the best way that I found of getting better at it is just every single bullpen, you just ask someone to stand in. And so it has to be a live hitter, by the way. It can't be like a dummy, because like that, it's just not the same stimulus. So you ask them, and then just challenge yourself. So like I would throw like sinkers and changeups against righties, and those are the pitches that go arm side, and so they have technically a higher chance of hitting the hitter. But I would do that and like try to desensitize myself to, hey, it's fine if I miss inside. It's not even that scary. It's fine. And I would just practice and rep that out, and then slowly that got way better to where, in some outings I didn't even think about it, and like I was throwing strikes like no issues. But yeah, I think having live hitters in there and then doing live BPs before competition is massive for the guys who struggle throwing strikes when there's a hitter in there. So how I would do it is, leading up to the season, I would have, when you start throwing your bullpens, have like one or two to just, get used to the mound and throw bullpens and stuff like that. But then after your one or two, all right, you're going to start having stand-in hitters every single bullpen. And then you do that for a couple weeks, and then now you can do live BPs. And by that point, you're going to be so used to having a hitter in the box that you're gonna be used to it, and it's not going to phase you anymore. And so when you're in competition, it's not going to be a surprise. You're going to be prepared for it, and you're going to be desensitized to like the fears and everything. So that's my next point.
I like that. That's great. And I think that's super important. I actually felt that a little bit, in college and maybe high school too. I was always a strike thrower, but it definitely, like, I felt like the beginning of the game, especially, I would be a little off just because you're warming up in the bullpen, or even in your bullpens prior during the week, there's nothing there. It's just a big open space, wide open target to the catcher. Then a batter gets in there and it's like, oh, this is definitely a different feel. So I think there's a lot of validity to practicing as much as you can with a batter standing in there. And, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned it needs to be a real batter and not a dummy. Obviously, like that makes sense to me. Now, if there's a situation where you can't get a real batter, a dummy, I assume in your mind would be the second best option, or maybe it's the first thing you do if you really have a fear of overcoming hitting someone or those types of things. But I totally agree. Like when you have a batter in there, makes a world of difference, because just from a visual standpoint, like a lot of my pitches at least were based off of the batter. Like let's just say I was facing a left-handed batter, like I had a visual of starting my slider at his hip. So having a batter in the bullpen stand in, it just made it easier for me to practice my actual visuals of what it would be like in a game situation. And plus, if the hitter is honest, you can also get some feedback on what they're seeing from you on your pitches. Are you tipping anything? What pitches are they recognizing sooner or later? You can just get really good feedback from them. I'm curious for you, when you were going through this and you still had a fear of hitting the batter, when you did throw to, let's just say, a dummy, or if you did throw to a dummy, was there a fear then? Or if there was a dummy in there, you would just let you be fine?
It really depended on the stage where I was at. When I was really bad, like I would still be feeling it for sure. It was also dependent on if I was in camp or not, or like if I was like in spring training and like the bullpens are really narrow. That would kind of get to me a little bit, because there are like 10 bullpens going at the same time, and like I didn't want to, that got in my head. It really shouldn't have, but it did. I think when like I was throwing a bullpen by myself, it was fine. Like a dummy was pretty much like there was nothing there. It didn't bother me at all. But it was a different story when a live hitter stepped in. It was a completely different feel, and it was more game-like. And something that really that I really like doing was doing that at different intensities. So it doesn't have to be all like stand-in hitter 100% effort. Do it on like your like lighter touch and feel days. You just have a stand-in hitter there, and then you're still working on it. And it's actually kind of tough to throw it like sub-max effort with a hitter in, because I don't know, it's just a really different feel, but it just goes back to like just challenging yourself and like coming up with like new experiences to stretch yourself a little bit.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's like you've talked about before. Like, just find a way to get a new stimulus, and this is a great way to do this, having a batter in there and just making the stakes feel a little bit higher in a bullpen setting. So that's great. All right, so my next one is athletic throws. And I love this one, and every pitcher will love this one, especially once you become a PO, because everyone says you're not an athlete anymore. I want to make sure that we eliminate that thought. We want to be as athletic as possible. And when you're a PO for too long, the tendency is to get a little robotic on the mound. Like, I've seen this with guys, especially guys that struggle throwing strikes, or if like they've just been pitching for a super long time. Like if you're already a PO in high school or you're a PO in college, which most guys in college are, sometimes players get robotic. And what I mean by that is they're super stiff. It's very mechanical, leg up, leg down, throw, and they just lose feel and looseness in their delivery. This is where things like athletic throws come into play. So you could do this in catch play, or you could do it in a bullpen. And it's literally just be an athlete. It could be you're pretending like you're backhanding a ball, like you're a shortstop and making a Jeter jump throw to your partner. It could be just throwing from a different arm slot. There's various ways you could do it. And like, that's one of my favorites, is like to change the arm slots, do a little spin move. I even like to just like pretend I'm like a quarterback sometimes, drop back, make a lob pass, make a throw on the run. Anything that just gets you out of your comfort zone and out of your regular mechanics when you're throwing the baseball. And another version of this where you can actually track this and measure how much better you're getting is through something called the clock drill. And I heard this the first time through Trevor Bauer in one of his YouTube videos. Basically, what you do is you have a cone at the middle point, and everything flows to this middle point. So let's just say I have a cone on the mound right on top of the rubber, and I'm starting at 6 o'clock. So if you're looking at a clock, let's just say that the mound is the middle of this clock. I'm at 6 o'clock. So I'm between home plate and the mound. I would run. So I do like a quick sprint, like a 10-yard sprint to the mound, quickly turn, fire, throw it to a target, whether it's a 9-pocket, a net, whatever you have that's at the location of home plate. You could do this from various angles. You could do it from the first base side, from the third base side. You could pretend like you're spinning a ball and turning a double play and throwing it to a target. The point is to challenge yourself from different angles, different positions, and just free yourself up and just let it rip to whatever that target is. So this is one of my favorite things. I've incorporated this a ton with players. Started doing this a couple years ago with guys. Have gotten really good results with it. I think it's just a really good way to free guys up. Like I said, you can do this on flat ground, but you can also do this on the mound. And if you want to get really weird, I did this a little bit last year with a guy during bullpens. I would literally have him change his mechanics every single time he made a pitch on the mound. So let's just say it was all fastballs. It was a 10-pitch bullpen. All fastballs, trying to throw it in the strike zone right down the middle. I'd have him do one throw from the far first base side of the rubber with his arm at a low 3/4 slot. The next one, I'd have him go on the far third base side from over the top. The next one would be like a drop step throw, like a plyo drill that you would do. We would just change it up. Literally every throw would be different, and we'd see how many times he could throw it for a strike from those different positions. So that's another version of variability train as well. By challenging your system, by trying to throw strikes from different positions, it actually makes you more repeatable when you do your regular delivery. Plus, it's a lot of fun. Like, I would jump in there sometimes with them too, and I would challenge them like, hey, out of these 10, let's see who can throw the most strikes at these different positions. So it's just a fun way to work on strikes while not feeling like you're in a command camp or you're focusing on this. This is your issue that you need to work on, but rather changing it to something fun, freeing them up and getting them more athletic.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love athletic throws. I incorporated it a lot in my baseball career, especially early going out playing catch. I would do like run to the side, jump and throw like Jeter type throws, and like it would just kind of free you up. I felt like it was really freeing, because sometimes yeah, as you said, you can just feel so robotic. And if you're like playing catch when you're like out of your delivery, then it just feels like the same thing over and over again. And like, yeah, I really loved it because it felt like it just loosened your body and also your mind up a little bit because you're just like, just being free and athletic. And so, yeah, I think a funny story that I heard on variability training, it goes back to the differential walls, but one of my coaches, he used to coach, he was with the Phillies when I was there, and he used to coach like a college. And he told me that he had this guy who had terrible command. And the next year he won like the best pitcher of the year or something. And I was like, damn, what'd you do to him? And he was like, I literally just put every single like different ball into a bucket, plyo balls, weighted balls, baseballs, like watered down baseballs. It didn't matter. He put it in a bucket and just randomly threw it to him and told him to hit a target. And he'll do that for like months. And because he had terrible command, so he wasn't really playing that year. So he would just like, he was on that program. And then, I mean, it worked. And so the next year he had good command and then he won like best pitcher of the year or something like that. So I think there's a lot there. It's just really hard to track. I feel like command it's really tough because like, I don't know, you probably know better than me, Jared, but like command, I feel like it's dependent on so many things. It's dependent on like how your body's feeling that day, how your mind is feeling that day. So like it's kind of hard. It was hard for me to track if I actually got better at command because, maybe I threw more strikes in the bullpen or whatever, but that's not really what mattered. It mattered like what I did in the game. And I felt like there were just way too many variables in the game to know if I made any progress or not. So what do you have on that?
Yeah, that's a great point because, like you said, we can throw all the strikes we want a bullpen, but it doesn't matter if we don't do it in the game. That's where it matters the most. But what I would do is I would track your balls and strikes in both settings. Like whatever your drill is, whatever your bullpen scripts are, track your balls and strikes in bullpens and then compare it to the games and try to figure out what is the disconnect. Like if you think your training is locked in, if you think you're challenging yourself, you're doing differential balls, you're doing athletic throws, you're doing all of these things and it's still not carrying over, I would say that it's probably a mental thing. It's less of a skill aspect and it's more of some sort of mental hurdle that is going on there. And that happens. Like there's plenty of guys that happens to. They do everything what you would say is right in training. They're challenging themselves. They're trying different things. They're getting better in the practice setting, but not in the game setting. That is one of the toughest things to crack. Because like you said, there's so many variables and there's so many variables going on in the head that as a coach, I can't fully understand or feel. And it just takes a lot of self-discovery from the player for them to really get to what is that root cause. With that said, I do think that there are a lot of players that they're just not practicing the skill of throwing strikes, and they need to improve that before they try to figure out what are these other things. Like the mental side obviously is always going to be important, but like if you're not attacking things from a skill perspective and a training standpoint, like you can't fully expect to throw more strikes and to get better at that. So I would just do that to start with. I would track balls and strikes in bullpens or whatever the drill work is you're doing and make sure you're actually tracking it. Because I will say there are some guys, they think they throw balls and they think they throw strikes in bullpens and then they actually track it and they find out, oh, I'm actually not as good at this as I thought I was. I was giving myself a pretty liberal strike zone when I'm throwing my bullpens normally. But when it's actually, you're actually tracking things and there's something on the line for it, it increases that attention a little bit more and you realize that you're not quite as good as you thought you were.
Cool. So what's the number one metric that you look at to measure command? Is it end zone percentage or is it strike percentage? Or when you were Twins, what did you guys look at?
End zone percentage would definitely be the primary one because that one's in your control. Like strike percentage, there's factors outside of what the pitcher does. Obviously, the batter swings at pitches out of the zone, but there's also the umpires calling strikes that are outside the zone. So, and there's another thing we need to kind of mention, or we haven't really talked about it. Like there is a difference between command and control, I would say. Like command is being able to throw the ball pretty specifically where you want to more times than not. And then control would be just throwing it generally in the strike zone. Most players need to focus on control. They need to get the ball in the strike zone, anywhere in the strike zone before worrying about specific quadrants or specific thirds. of the zone. But just generally speaking, like things that I look at and we looked at with the Twins would be in zone percentage as well as strike percentage. Like, let's see what is the separation between those two numbers. If there's a really large gap, like let's just say a below average in zone rate, but a really high strike rate, if it's a lower level guy, it could be his stuff is just so good that these guys are chasing everything out of the strike zone. Could be the umpires are bad, but nowadays I'd say the umpires are getting decent. They make bad calls, but they're getting decent. So it's really just signals how good is the pitcher's stuff at the lower levels or even at the big league level when there's a big spread between that in zone and strike percentage. And the reason why you don't want to get carried away with that at like the lower levels, let's just say single A, high A, is because as they go up, the hitters are going to get better and that chase is potentially going to come down. So we want to focus more on what the pitcher has control over, especially at those lower levels, because we don't know if that chase rate is going to be sustainable as they move up and ultimately get to the big leagues. So we want to focus more on what they do have control over, which is that in zone percentage. And just to give guys an idea, major league average is around 49% for overall in zone for all pitch types. Fastball is around 55%. Off-speed pitches, breaking balls specifically, are around 42 to 44%. Changeups and splitters are around 38 to 40%. Once again, this is in-zone percentage, not strike percentage.
I want to dive into my last point. It's a kind of a short point, but let's say that you're doing all these things. You're doing differential balls, you're doing athletic throwing, and you're working on your mental set and everything. But you need to compete like right now. Like you need to start throwing strikes right now. So one of the things that could help is pitch usage. So figure out what pitch you throw strikes with the best and start throwing that more. And so for me, I did this a lot in my career, which was I was great at throwing my breaking balls, and I'll throw them for more strikes than my fastball. And so I threw them way more. I think like one of my years, I threw like 80% breaking balls. And obviously I threw a cutter and a sweeper, and it was like 3 different breaking balls. It wasn't just one pitch, but I kind of like, I didn't really command my fastball too great. And so I just leaned on my breaking ball. And so I think one thing is that you don't have to like throw your fastball the most if you have terrible command of it. You can kind of rely on your other pitches if you can command them more. And so many guys in the big leagues are doing that. Like I know that when Shohei used to pitch, he had one game where it was literally like 90% sweepers. It was crazy. And I know Yu Darvish did that a lot, where it would throw like 70% cutters or something like that, 70% like breaking balls. And so the guys at the top levels are doing it. And so don't be afraid to lean on pitches that you can throw for strikes. And it doesn't have to be your fastball, even if it's, even if that's what everyone tells you to do. So my last point is throw the pitch that you can strike the most. And so, yeah.
That's great. And I think an important note, and you kind of alluded to it, like with Shohei, is it might change game to game. You might have one day where like, I just can't throw my fastball. I don't have any feel for it. Rather than trying to just do it over and over again, make an adjustment, throw a different pitch, try to find something that's working to get you through the outing. And I think that's just a good general rule for most guys is like, yeah, don't assume that the fastball is your best strike pitch, especially on a day where you're struggling with command. Like if I throw 4 or 5 straight balls with a fastball, I'd be stupid to throw another one. Try to throw throw a breaking ball, throw a changeup, anything, something different just to change the feel in your hand. And then, if you're still not throwing strikes with that, maybe try to come back to the fastball after. But like, don't try to just do the same thing over and over again. If you're missing consistently with one pitch, simply throwing another pitch might be the adjustment to help that other one, or you just ride that breaking ball for that day. Be adaptable and don't just stick to, what you normally do in your plan. And then to your point, Josh, like maybe there's a consistent theme where you're just better at one pitch versus the other, and it very well could be a breaking ball. And in the meantime, ride that as your primary pitch and then focus in your bullpens on your fastball command.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I did. And at the higher level you go, like the more accepted it becomes. Maybe like in high school, like people aren't gonna like it if you're like, hey, I'm gonna start throwing 80% breaking balls. They're like, hey, like you got to develop a fastball first. But the higher level you go, like what we were kind of told was throw your best pitch the most, and part of it being your best pitch is strike percentage. And so Yeah, that's kind of what we were taught, is like you got to go out with your best stuff, and yeah, don't be afraid to throw your off speed more than your fastball, because that's what a lot of guys at the top level do.
Yep, it finally happened last year or 2 years ago. I forget which year, but off-speed pitches were finally thrown more than fastballs. And off-speed pitches overall, you look at every stat, they perform better than fastballs. And finally, the average usage is more off-speed than fastballs at the major league level. So my last point is a simple one too. It's going to be quick, is small targets. So we've talked about using differential balls. We've talked about athletic throws. Now I want to finish up with small targets. When you throw to a small target and you challenge yourself, just once again, it's another way to challenge yourself. I mentioned earlier, some guys might be a little liberal with what their strike zone is when they're in a bullpen. They might throw a pitch that's 3 inches outside, but they give themselves credit because it was close enough. When you are throwing to a small target and you're tracking how many times you hit that target, it's as honest can be. Either you hit it or you don't. And that's what I love about throwing to targets. Pitchers want to throw to catchers all the time in their bullpens, and I get it. Like, I liked throwing to catchers too. I liked having that visual. But the truth is, using a target is one of the best ways to get better at throwing strikes. And an example of this is George Kirby for the Seattle Mariners. This guy is throwing, more strikes than anybody. He might be throwing too many strikes, honestly, because he gets hit from time to time because he's just constantly in zone, which is a good problem to have. I think it's easier to get guys to go out of zone than it is to get them in zone more. And what he does during the offseason is he only throws to a 9 pocket. This entire last offseason, and I don't know how many years he's been doing this, but I know this last offseason, he only threw to a 9 pocket, no catcher. And, he's George Kirby. I think if he wanted to throw to a catcher, he could find someone to catch him. But he chose to throw to a 9 pocket because he knows that it's going to give him honest feedback. He knows that it's going to help his command. And that's, to me, like when you see a big leaguer like that who's having the success and he's willing to do that when he could have a catcher, and 99.9% of big leaguers are going to throw to catchers in their bullpens, that tells me that every high school kid, every college kid, you shouldn't be too big or too important to throw to a target. Like a target like this is one of the best things you can do. I've just seen it so many times with guys. Like, they think they have good command. They think that they can throw the ball where they want to. And then you put a small 9 pocket out there and you tell them, okay, if you have that good a command, throw this one in the middle target here. There's 9 targets here. Throw it in the middle one, right down the middle. And they can do it maybe 1 out of 10 times if they're lucky to throw it right down the middle. So that's what I love about it. It's honest. It gives you objective feedback. It's a great way to work on throwing strikes because it just gives you objective feedback. Now, a 9 pocket isn't the only way. You could also use, something that we use with the Twins, actually. It was like a metal bell or a metal gong type thing that was like just a circle, literally probably, this big, if you can scale that for what I'm doing on my camera, like probably 8 inches wide, 8 inches tall, something like that. And it would make a sound when you would hit it. So we would set that up in the middle of a 9 pocket and you had to try to hit that every time. And it was just another great way to work on throwing to a small target. And just, the general idea that people have talked about before is like when you aim small, you typically miss small. So like by having those small targets, when you're actually in game and you have a bigger target, bigger catcher, it should be easier to throw strikes with it. But what are some things that you've done, Josh? Have you thrown to targets? I mean, I know you've thrown to a 9 pocket, but what are some other targets you've thrown to?
Yeah, I love the 9 pocket. The only downside is that there's no one to cap your throws, and so
True.
sometimes I'd be out there and I'd just throw like 50, and I wouldn't even realize it. I'd be like, all right, one more, all right, one more, all right, one more. But no, I really liked it. Aside from that, yeah, it was pretty much 9 pockets. I feel like maybe I did something with like an L net. I don't know what it's called, like an L net, and like try to simulate if like the bigger part was like a hitter and then the smaller part was the catcher, and I'll try to throw it into the smaller part, something like that. But no, I really like throwing targets, and even when I was with the Rangers, I would always try to throw into a 9 pocket instead of the catches, because as you said, like they can frame the crap out of it. It could be a ball way outside and just bring it back in the strike zone, and it looks like a strike when it really wasn't. But the target is, it gives you objective feedback. So I really like that as well.
For sure. And I just thought of a couple other targets. One would be the tap trainer. So Oat Specialties, it's like the black little square type thing. It's a smaller target even than a 9 pocket. The only issue with it is it doesn't catch the ball, so it just ricochets everywhere, which if you're not in a cage can be a little frustrating with the baseballs going everywhere. And then a bigger target could be a command trainer. So once again, I think Oat Specialties makes this like the big green pad and it has like the numbers on it in the middle. You could use that as like a beginner stage for a bigger target, or you just throw to a certain part of that big square that's on there. So there's many ways to do this. You could even simply put string on a fence or on a screen and just make a little square or a circle, and you can make it as big or as small as you want. And that was something that I've done in the past too with guys that like struggle with throwing strikes. Is let's just say they're throwing to one of those, or they're throwing to a 9 pocket, and they can't throw strikes even with just a baseball at 30%. I would make a target on a net that's bigger. So I just make like a circle basically that's bigger than a regular baseball strike zone. And I would have them throw it to that. Once they could throw it at a certain percentage consistently in zone, then I would make the target smaller. And you just gradually get smaller and smaller from there. So it's important, once again, to meet the player where they're at and making sure that the failure level isn't too low and that you are building confidence during this as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the first step that I tell everyone to do if they have the yips, is start really close, start really big into a net. And so, that's the first step. But yeah, that was good. Those were some good points that we hit on.
No doubt. No, I enjoyed this one. I learned a lot from you with the arousal stuff, and I just think this was a great episode. All right, that's it.